So the very scary noise from Zoom is reminding you that the meeting is being recorded. And so for today, we have two topics on the agenda, both proposed by Abhishek. So these comments, the first one is a proposal to add a baseline tier. And for this, we have already an open issue, which is issue 1362. And the second are potential solutions for sorting Antrea native policies based on tier priority and policy priority, which is issue 1388. I'm going to copy these two topics on the chat for everyone's benefit. You can also find them on our Slack channel. And given that Abhishek proposed both topics, it makes sense to let him talk about them. Abhishek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salvatore. I'm sharing the screen just to go through the issues and maybe one proposal for the first issue. Ever since we introduced the Antrea native policies and tiering CRDs in the past couple of releases, we have had some users trying them out, and we have already received some feedback in terms of what they would like to see in the policies or in tiering and those CRDs. There are a few feedback, couple of things, actually more than two that were reported. Uh, Two of them are on GitHub issues. Some of them I have maintaining myself like a list of things, which I'll open up issues for them as well. So between those feature requests or ask, I thought these two issues are probably worth tackling soon. So the first one is raised, although this issue is raised by Jay, but the actual feedback comes from Farid Saad. Essentially, his use case is that, okay, maybe I'll back up a little. With the Antrea network policies and tiering, what we introduced is that an ability to for administrators to write network policies which will override a developer policy or a developer return Kubernetes network policy. So the tiers in which we create are always evaluated and enforced before the Kubernetes network policies are enforced. So, so this use case is actually for something to be done the other way around. That is, they want to have some guardrail rules for the cluster, some default cluster-wide policies to be enforced, but they want to allow namespace owners or developers to write their own network policies to override those cluster scope policies. So this is something that we have not yet, or our tiering does not solve. So, so that's the use case. So I think if we go back to the diagram, on this community doc that we have, uh, essentially this is the lay of the land. That is, we provide capability for users to create their own tiers. In addition to that, we also have some system generated default tiers that are created, or I should not say default tiers. I will say that we have 5 tiers that are created when Antrea controller is initialized. So for default consumption of the administrators, but they can also create their own tiers. Now, the thing is that if the cluster administrator decides to create their own tiers, today they can only create tiers which will be enforced before the Kubernetes network policy table. So in this case, now we have like 3 tiers in the diagram. As you can see, the emergency tier takes precedence over every other tier. So any policy which is created in this tier will be first enforced. So if there's a perfect match on the rule's action will be taken. If not, then it flows to the next tier and all the way to the application tier, which happens to be the default tier, wherein all the policies which do not have an association with the tiers are accumulated. Once all these tiers are evaluated and there is no match, then the traffic will be matched against Kubernetes network policies, which are developer written, and these are all upstream policies. And eventually, when none of these traffic pattern or rule matches, today what we do is that we either allow or drop based on whatever the baseline rules are. So, in general, if there is no if the pod is not selected by any of those network policies, then the traffic will be allowed. So essentially, the ask by Farad or by the community users is that we need another tier which can be created and policies can be associated with that tier after the Kubernetes network policy. So I updated this diagram to include a tier called a baseline tier. This will also be a system generated like a, or the proposal is that we would like to create this baseline tier at startup. And I don't think there should be, we should allow users to create more than one baseline tier, or provide that flexibility. Because I think for this particular use case, a single tier below the Kubernetes network policy probably solves all the use cases that would be out there. So in short, the proposal is that we add a baseline tier when Antrea controller is initialized, and then allow cluster administrators to now associate policies either to their higher ordered tiers or to a baseline tier. So I hope, I mean, if there are any questions on the user story or on the proposal, what do you guys think? Is this a viable option? Is this something that we can achieve? Any feedback, any question?
So any layer, any tier would have like a default allow rule, and basically any deny rule would apply on each one of those tiers?
So here is essentially a collection of policies, and in each policy there are rules. So when Antrea controller starts up, a tier will be created and it will be essentially empty. So let's say if a user does not create any policy or associates it with a baseline tier, so this will be empty. So that would essentially mean today's behavior, like the way the policies are today. That is, by default, the traffic will be allowed because in Kubernetes cluster, every pod should be able to communicate with each other. So if there is no policy associated with baseline tier, there will be no change in the traffic pattern. Did that answer your question, Kobe?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions, suggestion on whether this is the right approach, or maybe a question to people on the call is that, do you guys think we should allow the flexibility to create more than one baseline tier, or a system generated baseline tier at Antrea startup is good enough? Okay, silence, I will take it as acceptance.
So in the baseline tier, you don't have what's it called? It's typically only deny rules, right?
So I think the use case that Farad brought up was that he would like to create cluster-wide default denial policy, and with certain exceptions for communication from pods to the core DNS pods and kube system namespaces. And he would want the namespace owners to be able to allow traffic on top of this denied traffic. So if the namespace owner has not created an allow rule, or rather created a policy to allow some traffic, the default behavior would be to deny that traffic.
Okay. For do we really allow the allow rules in the baseline tier in your mind?
Yeah,
Allow-
I think. Sorry.
Yes,
I think that's something that's also coming up on the cluster network policy discussions we had last Thursday, is that because Kubernetes allow pods to talk to pods by default, so if the baseline tier is created under the Kubernetes network policy layer, then I agree that in this tier, it probably doesn't make sense for people to create a allow rule because the pods communication patterns will be allowed by default. But I don't know if that's some hard constraint that you want to impose on this tier, or if people just specify allow rules in this tier, it would simply have no effect.
Yeah. So essentially, I think if you have an allow rule in the baseline tier, it's really not it's really not doing anything special because by default you still allow traffic. So it I think by adding the baseline tier, we are just giving more control for the administrator to write policies. But at the end of the day, what kind of policies they write is something that we would not. I mean,
But you
I
say
think
if you don't have a allow rule, just one tier is good enough, right? Even create more tiers doesn't really help you. Yeah, true. Or not?
yeah, I agree. So you are agreeing that we should only we don't need to really provide a way for users to add more tiers, like to the baseline after Kubernetes network policy.
That's one
Why?
reason for if you have denied allow, then maybe makes more sense to have multiple tiers. I'm not sure. Do you have any other reason you want to do RBAC for your tiers, that you have different persona to create different baseline tiers? I don't know.
Yeah, but then that's true. But that's really not a use
Okay.
case that comes often, or at least the user who tried to bring up this issue did not come up with that kind of a use case.
Okay.
And
Another thing that for go
also,
ahead.
I think we don't want to restrict the kind of policy that goes in a baseline tier versus other tiers. Then you would have to do a lot more checks. I mean, we can give the ability to create allow rules. It's just that there's really no use. It's not the right use, proper use of that tier.
And Abhishek, I have a simple question on this design. The current proposal will put you in a situation where a Kubernetes network policy can override the baseline tier, meaning that probably the baseline tier has a policy to say to deny traffic on a given port, and then you override it with a Kubernetes network policy to instead allow traffic on a given port. Is that possible?
With the current design or with the new proposed design?
With the new proposed design.
Yes, I think that is what we are trying to achieve with this. So
Okay.
yeah. So so basically, if you have, let's say in this diagram, we have a ANTZ. Let's say this is used to deny traffic for port 8080, and and now as a cluster, sorry, as a namespace owner, for my namespace I create a network policy Z, which is essentially this thing, but it allows certain pods to allow traffic on port 8080. Then for those pods it will be allowed, and for other pods, it will not be allowed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. Then I was thinking about a different use case where you were using this baseline tier for having a baseline security behavior that users could not override status of apps. It's a different use case.
Yes. So if you want something which cannot be overridden by network policies, then you can create policies in either of any of the tiers that are higher order.
I see.
Actually, another one is that people are talking about they want some default behavior with isolated namespace, right? That means inside namespace you can communicate freely, but you cannot do any cross namespace communicating. For such kind of a policy, it cannot be defined with our kind of policy expression.
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead.
so like I mentioned at the beginning, is that there are multiple feature requests that come in. So this was one. The one that you mentioned is the other, wherein people want a very simple way to add a cluster scope policy, which kind of the effect is that my intra namespace intra namespace traffic is allowed, while inter namespace is not allowed, and I would like to have that as a baseline policy. So with the baseline tier, I think we provide them to have such kind of policy, but our policy is not yet expressive enough to do that, like a namespace isolation. So I think we can add on top of it afterwards and have our cluster scope policies the ability to express namespace isolation in an easy manner. So maybe we can decouple those two stories. Did I make sense?
And do you mean that policy can be on any tier?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't yet thought through how to implement the namespace isolation, but we can think about it in a separate user story. Is what I'm saying.
Okay.
But are you suggesting that we should do the namespace isolation only for these baseline tiers? Not doesn't make sense for higher order tiers.
No, I didn't think about it yet. I'm just asking what's
Okay.
what's
Yeah.
plan for that one.
Yeah. I think we need to have our policies be able to express that in a very simple fashion. Today, it is not yet the case.
Okay, got it.
Regarding having allow rules in the baseline tier, I had like a question. What if I want to define like a baseline policy that says, unless the developer decide to prevent this, maybe allow all of my pods to talk to core DNS pods, right? And I can do that using like a cluster
So
network policy.
Kubernetes network policy does not have an explicit deny rule yet. So anything that they will be creating would be an allow and then default
Well,
isolation.
yeah, but if I define a policy that selects pod A and say pod A can only talk to pod B, I mean pod A becomes isolated, right? And so it cannot talk to other pods B, even though I don't do an explicit deny. Just doing an allow means
Yeah.
if so.
Yeah. So the thing is that with this we are kind of altering the expectation of a Kubernetes network policy. Um, I think, right? Because if your pod A was supposed to be isolated, but as a administrator, if the isolation rule is enforced after the baseline tier, and the baseline tier adds like a, then we are altering the behavior of that Kubernetes network policy. So I
Okay, so
don't
in this
know
case, it does seem that I would only have deny rules in the baseline tier, because
if yeah, correct. I mean, yeah,
the other way I prevent traffic otherwise with a Kubernetes network policy is by making a pod isolated, basically with an explicit network policy. And then, as you say, if I allow some traffic in the baseline tier using an allow rules, and I'm basically changing the implicit behavior of the Kubernetes network policies.
Yeah, so I feel like in this particular case, the cluster admin might be better off creating that policy not in the baseline tier, but in some tier that's above Kubernetes network policy. If what they want to enforce is something like you should always be allowed to talk to core DNS.
Well, yeah, but then the same thing is that the developer cannot override it, right? What I was saying was that you should allow pods to talk to core DNS unless explicitly denied, basically. But you cannot deny it with a Kubernetes network policy.
Yeah,
anyway.
that's the thing. Yeah.
So it does seem to me that only deny policies make sense in the baseline tier.
Yeah. I mean, users can write allow policies. It's just that it's not really going to have much of an effect on the cluster.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see how it would have like any effect, right? Because if you don't have any Kubernetes network policies, and your baseline tier is not useful, And if you do have Kubernetes network policies, we don't want to be able to negate their the isolated behaviors that they provide, right? So
yeah, so I think an alternate to this would be that we do not have a baseline tier. We have a global config option.
yeah, that was going to be my next point. If the only use case we have is default denies, then
yeah, so there we could introduce a couple of option values. One is deny, which is you just deny any traffic. The other is just allow the namespaces, which gives you the default isolation of namespaces, but does not allow cross namespace talk. And the third one is default allow, which is essentially the current
same
behavior.
as now.
Yeah. The only thing is that it doesn't give you like an expression, a way to express very specific rules. Like I don't want certain traffic to be allowed by default, but maybe the administrator namespace, so namespace owner can change that. So that's an alternative which works for most use cases, but maybe not all. But I don't know if there exists a use case which needs to be that specific for a baseline tier. I guess Junjun, you're already aware of the config option based.
Yeah.
Approach.
For us, it's baseline that is more flexible.
Yeah.
You can control per namespace baseline.
That's true. I mean, if it's a cluster config option, then it's for the entire cluster. With the baseline tier, you have the ability to maybe write policies for certain namespaces and leave out certain other namespaces.
Yeah. And for its namespace, as I solved over, I think probably it makes more sense to be in baseline only. Otherwise,
Yeah.
very strange. I mean, if it's in up tier, you're saying namespace. I mean, actually, you mean you will allow all the intro namespace traffic that will override the other the policy below the tier. So it's pretty. I don't think it's very useful.
Maybe as a maybe as a cluster owner, you want to isolate namespaces and you don't want cross namespace talk, even though Kubernetes network policy does allow you to do that. But
Okay.
maybe you want to have them as silos, and depends on the use case of the cluster.
I see. Basically, you're not saying a namespace. I think you are saying sorry, probably I mean a different thing. I mean the behavior of I actually mean two behaviors. Isolate namespace and allow intro namespace. Probably I just mix them. Yeah, you're right. If you just want to isolate, you can still do it. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So it does make sense, it seems, to have give the flexibility to the administrators with the baseline tier.
I don't know how useful it is. I just mean I can imagine that there can be some.
I think it would be more useful when we do allow the expression
yes.
of default.
Yeah, because right now, based on the use cases that people have presented to us, these are mostly like the configuration parameters you presented, right? Allow within a namespace by default, but not to other namespaces, or default deny. So those are the actual user requests we've had. But I agree that if we can make ACNP more expressive to satisfy those use cases, and the baseline tier semantics become more useful. And more powerful than just having like configuration parameters.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I guess maybe that could be the next next issue which we can open up for the namespace isolation expression, and maybe we can think about how to do that with our policies. If no other questions, then maybe we move to the next issue.
Hi, Abhishek. Just one more very bookkeeping thing. So I remember for the tiers, we have the numbered priority associated with it. and higher the number, the lower the priority. So for this baseline tier, what are we thinking in mind for assigning the priority for that tier?
So as part of the tiering CRD, we left a range as reserved, like a higher, very high range, and maybe we can use one of those reserved priority numbers as one for the baseline tier, which would be known, which will still be reserved and which will be known to the system, agent and controller.
Okay, sure.
Would that satisfy?
Yeah, that works for me. But I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, for that reserve range, maybe we want to pick some in between values in case we wanted to add, you know, more baseline tiers in the future.
Yes, I think right now we have about 4 or 5 reserved priority numbers.
Yeah.
And if I try to create a tier above 250 right now, which is I think is the default tier priority, right now the webhook is going to give me an error. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And right now we're going to keep that behavior if we introduce the baseline tier as well. So I won't be able to create a tier between the default tier and the baseline tier, right?
Yes. Correct. Cool. All right. So yeah, maybe we can discuss the exact implementation, what number to use in on the PR. The next one is, you know, it's more cosmetic, not much functional behavior. So this one is about, as you guys know that, you know, as you all know that for the cluster scope policies, we have priorities which help us order a policy precedence over the other policies, lower the number float value of the priority means it is of higher order. Similarly, the tiers are also ordered based on priority. So there's a lot of priority numbers going on around, right? And since we don't have a dashboard or a way to visualize things, you know, mostly people use kubectl to view those policies. So, you know, this is a very good, you know, as part of the issue, these also provide an example. Essentially, if he does a get for the sorts by the priority field, he gets all the cluster scope policies or anti-native policies based on the increasing order of the priority number, but they are, you know, if you have policies spanning across multiple tiers, you know, it will only consider this the policy priority number. It doesn't consider the tiers order because the tier is in, you know, in the form of its string name, right? So what we are seeing is that although PA1 is shown at the top, so now as a user, I would think that this is the highest ordered policy, which is not the case because, you know, the PA1 belongs to application tier. And as we know, the application tier is one of the lowest priority tier, while the emergency tier is the most highest priority tier. So if we see that PE1, which belongs to emergency, is technically the most highest ordered policy. So what happens here is that the output of a kubectl is not really giving me the correct picture. Now there are a couple of ways to solve this problem. One, I think, Yang, maybe you want to talk about it because you also kind of proposed similar thing. I think I had an offline chat with Chan on this about adding a new field on a effective priority sort of that we can have. Essentially, what the effective priority would do is that it will take the tier name and it will take the policy's priority number, and then it will, you know, normalize this into another priority field or a number, which will become the part of the anti-native policy spec, and then we can sort on that one field. So, you know, I think I also spoke about this approach with Chan offline, and I think maybe Chan, you want to talk about why you were kind of against, or you did not really like that, was because now we have like 2 or 3 priorities associated with the single policy. So any feedback on so far on this issue? Before okay, go ahead, Antonio.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I was also thinking about the status thing, but it kind of seems wrong because I'm adding to status something that's entirely determined by the spec in a way, right? I mean, it feels weird that I have to rely on status to sort those objects, those resources, when in the end their priority is like completely determined by the specification I've provided for them.
Yeah, so for the status, I think I had initially proposed that, but I think Chan also had a suggestion that maybe instead of the status, we kind of do this in the mutating webhook itself. So as part of, we introduce a webhook for mutation, which at the, before it's passed to the controller, it just takes in the tier priority, takes in the policy priority, and then generates it in the spec itself. And adds it to the spec instead of adding it to this as part of the status. But essentially, it will still result in the new field.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I understand the appeal of being able to do it with kubectl, but I kind of feel like that's also why we have nctl in the first place. Being able to do things like this.
I see.
That's a really good point too.
So I feel, I mean, it would be nice to be able to do it with kubectl using the built-in features, but at the same time, I feel like we also want to make nctl better and like a to-go place for users, and so maybe we should not go out of our way too much to like define some solution just to have it work with kubectl, a solution that would add complexity, right? Because now we would like mutate the resource and so on.
Yeah, I think we are already planning to add a mutation webhook for the rule names, but yes, it's just another value to be added.
One thing I actually also want to bring up is that I might be horribly wrong about this, but does the end cuddle only work on the agent containers or for the controller agent as well?
Now that would be the remote mode where you connect to the controller. So you can download nctl on your laptop, right, and give it kubeconfig just like you would kubectl, and then it connects to the Antrea controller through the Kubernetes APIs.
Okay, I see. Yeah, the reason I'm asking this is that when I was discussing this with Abject, and he brought up a point where, if we have ACMP or AMP enforce on pods on different nodes, then we probably want to, we doesn't really want to look into the policy that on that specific node, right? We want to look at all the policies and figure out their relative priorities rather than just looking at what's on the node. So this has to be done somewhat like globally in order to work.
Yeah, I think it should be possible.
However, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like, isn't it true that today nctl is only gonna use the control plane API and query the internal policies, or is it able to get the actual CRDs?
I don't think so. I think we don't add that function yet.
But I do believe that the tier priority and the policy priority both should be part of the internal network policy spec. So we should be able to finalize the priority.
That's true.
The only problem is then displaying with the tier name might be a problem.
Yeah, but my point was right now, if the user actually wants the CRD and not the internal resource, right? Right now, nctl only gets you the internal resource. It doesn't query the CRD from the Kubernetes APIs. It only queries internal object from the controller.
Yes, I think so. Maybe we need to revise the command name because it will be confusing.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, this CRD network policies.
Yes, but from my point of view, like as long as then we are given the names with the relative order, if user want to actually look at the CRDs or from the Kubernetes perspective, they can always use the name and the kubectl command to actually inspect those resources, as long as in mctl we provide them with the sort of like the ordering he is looking to see. But yeah, that's my opinion on this.
Yeah,
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Abhishek.
Yeah, I was going to say, as long I think, yeah, as long as there is some sort of way, yeah, between the two kubectl outputs and mctl output, I think the user will be able to figure that out. It's just going to be a two-step process if he wants to get more information about the policy. The other proposal that I had was probably, requires a upstream change. It's potential something that we can, if the upstream folks thinks that it is something that we can add and is valuable to the kubectl output, is today the sort by filter criteria picks only a single field and it sorts on that. I don't know if they'll be happy to accept something, or I don't know whether this is very easy to perform, but we provide a list of fields and the sort happens on each of those multiple fields based on the priority in which they are sent in. So for example, if I were to do kubectl get ACMP sort by spec.tier, spec.priority, then it first sorts on the spec.tier and then next output would be sorting on spec.priority, and then that would give us the correct order. But that would mean an upstream change in kubectl.
Don't we have the same problems though, where the tiers are going to be sorted by a lexicographic order?
Yeah, but I think
because in the policy CRD, all you have is a tier name, right?
The application. Yeah, so we might have to mutate it back to the tier priority.
Sorry, either my internet was bad or your internet was bad. I couldn't hear you for a second here. Yeah.
Okay. So I said that maybe we need to mutate the tier name back to a tier priority, and then use that output.
I don't know, Abhishek, I have the feeling that every proposal to solve this problem is a little bit over-engineered, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, if I was commenting to this issue report, I would say use AWK and sort to filter the output so that it displays nicely.
Yeah. Or you could still comment that. But yeah, but I think the mctl is kind of like a good.
Yeah, I agree on that.
Also gives more value to our CLI.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't think that will be too hard to implement, given that we have all the information handy already in the store. So
yeah, I think we don't need to poll anything.
So I hate to interrupt on this topic, but we have only 18 minutes in the meeting and another fairly large topic for today's agenda. So I would like to ask you if there is any final question on this issue. So as some of you know already, Roy in the past few weeks has been working on an operator for Antrea, and his work now is a very mature stage. So he would like to present what is this operator for Antrea, how it works, and what are its benefits. So, Ray, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm ready. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So next, I will show a demo about the Antrea operator. Before the demo, I will have a brief introduction about the Antrea operator. For example, what the Antrea operator can do and how it works. Okay, let's start from the introduction. Okay, the main task or main target of the Antrea operator is to provide automatically way to deploy Antrea plugin. Antrea plugin resources. The resources includes the Antrea controller deployment, the Antrea agent daemon sites, config maps, and other resources. Besides the deployment, the operator will also have the ability to monitor the configuration changes from the user and apply the configuration change to the Antrea resources. And also the Antrea operator we can monitor the Antrea resource or Antrea object status and to maintain the resources to a desired state. For example, if we have if we delete the Antrea controller or some resource by mistake, the Antrea operator will monitor the changes and will create the resource bank again to meet the desired state. And the last task is when the operator is running, it will update the rated status according to the operator reconciliation process or results. For example, if the operator is working on created resources, it should update its status and processing to some resource to show the status of the operator. So it's the main function of the Antrea operator. Okay, so this is about the components of the Antrea operator. The Antrea operator consists mainly two components. Deployment. The Antrea operator runs as a deployment, and the deployment will include the Antrea resource template manifests. This template is from the Antrea all-in-one YAML file. Antrea operator will use this template to generate the Antrea resource specs. And the operator will also have a custom resource, which named the Antrea install. This case of resource is for configurations for the Antrea. For example, the user can specify the Antrea configurations in this resource. Because, for example, the Antrea controller config or the agent config, the CNF config, or the Antrea image version. This configs will be written to the Antrea config maps by the Antrea operator. Just like we edit the config maps directly. And here is an example of the Antrea install custom resource. For example, in the spec, we can see here are the configs we just listed above. For example, we can set the agent config in this option, in the Antrea agent config option, and set the controller config in the controller config option. And also we can set the image we want to use by the Antrea. And the last one is the Antrea CNI config. This config will be used by the Antrea agent to be installed on the node. Okay. So next, let's say how Antrea operator works. Antrea operator will just works as a controller. It will run the reconciliation logic to monitor the change of the config and apply the user config to Antrea resources. For example, we just have shown that we have a custom resource named Antrea store. We will set all Antrea related configs in this custom resource. And for Openshift, it will have additional class network config, which we can set the port sider, the service sider, and other options. So these two files will contains all the configurations needed by deployment. So the operator will use these config options and render these options in the Antrea .yaml template file and generate the Antrea objects spec. This template file is just a copy of the Antrea all-in-one YAML from the Antrea upstream, and just the operator will need to replace the configs in this template. And last, after we generate the all Antrea objects spec, the operator will apply these specs to the API server and to create the Antrea objects. So this is the config reconciliation.
The real
And,
question for the YAML template, why we get a YAML template? It's from the Antrea upstream, or it's like you maintain that in Antrea operator repo?
This is from the Antrea repo, from the release sites. And yeah, okay. And besides the config reconciliation, Antrea we also run the pod reconciliation logic. It will monitor the status of the Antrea controller deployment and the Antrea agent daemon sites. If the resource is deleted, the Antrea will recreate the object again. And during the reconciliation process, Antrea will set the status of the process or the results to some resources to show the current process of the operator. Here we list three resources which will record the status. The first one is the class operator processing status. It will show if the Antrea operator is processing config change or other things, and if the operator is in degraded states. We can take an example. For example, we just make a config change, and the operator will process the config change. And during this stage, the processing status of this resource will be true. It will mean the operator is working on the process. And another is the Antrea configuration realization status. We can remember that we set the Antrea configs in the Antrea install custom resource. So this status will record if the configuration is realized or not. And the last one is the class network status. This resource is used in the Openshift environment. In Openshift environment, we can set the cluster scope network configuration in this resource. For example, we can see that here we set the cluster setter here, and we set the service setter here. And after the operation, the operator has reached the realized status. It will update this customer resource to record the current status, current realized status. For example, we can see here we have an additional status option, the MTU. It means the operator has currently set the MTU as 1040 and 400. Okay, here is a brief introduction of the Antrea operator. So any questions?
Hi, Ray.
Okay.
I'd like to know when will the cluster operator shows the degraded state? When will the degraded status is true?
Okay. The one case is that, for example, we can assume that if we have a wrong configuration for the Antrea, in this case, the Antrea agent or the controller may cannot be created successfully. So after, in this case, we will see that the Antrea cannot be deployed properly or successfully, and if the keys sit for a long time, the Antrea operator will set this degrade status and false and true.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. Okay, next stage, I will show the demo of the operator on Openshift 4. And here are the steps I will list in the demo. So firstly, we will show the class scope network of configuration before we deploy Openshift cluster. And the second step, we will use the configuration we just set and to deploy the Openshift cluster. And after we have installed the Openshift cluster, we can test or verify the Antrea operator functions. For example, we can update some configs of the Antrea and to see if it will take effect. And the third step is that we can delete some Antrea resource and to see if the operator will create it again. And in the last step, I will show if the Antrea network can work properly in the Openshift environment. Okay, I just recorded a video for the demo. Let's start the demo. Okay, firstly, we will set a cluster scope network configurations for the Openshift cluster.
Right. I think actually we only see the PPT. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me switch it. Okay. Can I see the video screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. Okay. Firstly, I will edit the cluster scope network configuration for the cluster. We use a file named install config .yaml. And we will set the networking option. The fields we need to set is to one is to change the network type. Here is NCP. Where we will change it to Antrea. And for the other options, we will keep it as the original. For example, the port setter and others. And here we can see there's platform field. This field, this option is for the configuration of vCenter. Here we change the network type to Antrea and save it. Okay, next we will use the Openshift install command to create the manifests for the deployment. After we execute this command, we will have some manifest files. This directory will consist the YAML files or the YAML resources which are needed to be installed to the cluster. Because we want to install the entry operator during the bootstrap, so we will need to copy the entry operator YAML files to this manifest directory. So let's copy it. We can see we will copy the essential files, for example, the namespace, the operator deployment, and the role binding YAMLs. Okay, next I will use another command, the create ignition configs. After we execute this command, we can see the direct content exchange. We can see here we list the files in this directory. We can see there's 1, 2, 3 ignition config files. These 3 config files are used to deploy Openshift cluster virtual machines. It will each of the files will contain the virtual machine config and the network configurations for the virtual machines. For example, the bootstrap .ign is for the bootstrap virtual machine, and the master file is for the master node, and the worker.ign is for the work node. We will need the virtual machine config files when we deploy the virtual machines. Let's go to the next step. Yeah. If we want to deploy Openshift cluster, we will need to download the installer, which is provided by Openshift to help install the infrastructures. The Openshift installer will use the Terraform for the deployment. So we will need to copy the virtual machine configs in the Terraform config file. Here is the terraform.tf vars. Let's open it. Okay, and we can see in this file we have already set some options. For example, the top lines are the options for the vSphere vCenter options we want to use, and we can see the middle lines. It includes the control plane counts and the computer node counts. And this line is the bootstrap ignition URL. This URL will point to the bootstrap.ign and the file we just created. And the next line is the control plane ignition. In this line, we can paste the control plane virtual machine configs here. And the next line is a computer ignition option. We will copy the we will copy the work node configuration here. And in the bottom lines, these are settings for the IPs of the virtual machines. Okay, let's start to copy the virtual machine configurations. Okay, take the master node as example. We can just copy the content of the master configuration file and paste it here. The other nodes will have the same operations. I will skip it. Let's go to the next step. So after we have set the virtual machine configurations, we can use the Terraform to apply the configurations and create the cluster. We can use the apply command to create all the virtual machines in the cluster. Okay, from the log, we can see that the Terraform is creating the VMs. If we open the UI, web UI of the vCenter, we can see here is a directory, the WP, user provision infrastructure. We can see from the tasks, the VM is in creating. Okay, the create process will take a lot of time. So the Openshift has also provide a command to wait the bootstrap complete. We can use this command to wait the bootstrap of the cluster complete. Okay, it will cost about 30 minutes. We can skip this type. Okay, after for a while, we can see here, it is now safe to remove the bootstrap resources. So it means the bootstrap stage of the cluster is complete. Now let's say the node status of the cluster. So, firstly, let's get the status of nodes. We use the OC get nodes. We can see here we have successfully deployed the 6-node cluster, and every status of nodes is ready. So it is ready now. It means it also has the initialized CNI plugin. Next, let's see the entry operator status. So we can see here, we can see that the status shows that now currently the processing is false. It means currently is the status of config have reached the desired state. And degraded flag is false. So let's check the Antrea ports. Okay, we can see that the Antrea agent and the Antrea controller are created successfully. And then let's see the status of the cluster network. Okay, from here we can see that currently the status of the cluster network has met the spike of the in the network, and currently the cluster network MTU is 1,450. So next we can verify the function of the Antrea. For example, in this step, we can change the MTU of the Antrea and to see if the change will take effect. I will edit the Antrea install custom resource. We can in this custom resource, we saved all the configurations for the Antrea. Okay, I will edit the Antrea agent configuration and set the default MTU to another value, to a new value, and save the option. And at the same time, I will monitor the status of the Antrea operator in the bottom. You can see currently the processing is false, and then I will save the configuration. Okay, after the configuration change, we can see the processing have switched to the true. It means the Antrea operator is working on change the configuration. Let's wait for a while. Okay, after some while, we can see the processing have switched back to false. And we, if we list the ports, we can see the agent is created recently. Because if we change the MTU, it will need to recreate the agent. So from this step, we can say that the Antrea operator can monitor the config change and apply the config change successfully. Yeah, if we see the class network status, the MTU has been changed to a new value. Okay, so next step, I will delete the Antrea controller deployment, and to see if the Antrea operator will monitor the change and recreate the deployment automatically. We can see currently the Antrea controller deployment is exists, and let's delete it. We use the delete the deployment. Okay, currently the deployment has been deleted, and we can see there is a change in the processing. It has been switched to true. It means the operator has monitored the change. And yes, we can monitor the deployment change here. And wait for a while, we can see that the operator has recreated the Antrea controller again. So from this step, we can show that if the Antrea resource is deleted by user or by some other way, the operator will monitor the change and recreate the resource again. Okay, here is the next is the last step. In this step, I will want to verify the function of the Antrea networking. We will test if the network connectivity between port and the service is as expected. So I will apply some ports and services. Okay, we can see on each node, we have created a hello world pod, and let's test the connectivity between the different nodes. I select the two pods from the different node, and use the curl command for the test. Yes, here we can see the output hello Kubernetes. So it means the pod connectivity between the node is successfully. Next, let's check the connectivity between pod and service. Here we have just created a hello world service. I will use a pod to access this service. Let's use the class IP. Okay, we can see that the pod also can access the service successfully. So this step means we use the Andrea operator to deploy a function normal Andrea plugin. Okay, then that's all for the demo.
Thank you very much, Ray. And we are quite a bit over time. So is there any question on for Ray on this demo?
I do have several questions, but I'm not sure. I should ask here or I should ask off now.
It depends. If I think, so in the interest of everyone's time, if it's a quick question, please go ahead. If it's like something that you believe requires, more conversation, perhaps we can have it on Slack.
Okay, maybe let me start with several quick ones. So first, do we support cleaning up of the Antrea? I mean, do we have a way to delete Antrea and clean up all the resource and the state we installed or changed on every node?
Do you mean to delete all resources about
Right,
Andrea?
Yes, and probably even better if we can remove any state left on the host, on the node, like IP tables, whatever.
Currently, we only support to deploy to delete the deployment and the daemon sites of the Antrea.
Okay.
And
go ahead, miss.
Yeah, if we delete some other resources, currently we didn't monitor the other change of the resource.
Okay. Probably I should ask, is that typically a responsibility of an operator to do the cleanup of the resource in the state when we install the thing?
The cleanup.
Right.
So how do you do the cleanup to remove the every resources of the Antrea?
Actually, I'm not sure what Openshift operator or other operator typically do. I'm just wondering, do we know any other operator or do we know Openshift operators support some cleanup way, like run daemon set to clean up?
Jensen, from what I know, some application operators, when you delete the operator, they perform this kind of cleanup, like deleting every resource that was managed by the operator. But other operators, when you delete the operator, they just do nothing. So, all the resources that are managed by the operator are just left there. I don't know if this is the correct behavior or not, but we find both. In this case, in particular, when you install the operator with this process in the Openshift cluster, the problem is that I don't think that once you remove Antrea, Openshift will do anything to install another CNI solution. So basically, the cluster will be left without any CNI at all.
Got it. Got it. Because we do have issues still there in Antrea report about cleanups. Wondering, should we be able to use operator for that?
We can surely think about it. but not in the Openshift scope, I think.
Got it.
I don't know, Roy. Roy, what do you think about it? That would be like, I believe, an explicit. There will be something that the operator will have to explicitly do, because if you just delete the operator deployment, then the operator pod will die and will not collect the resources. So there must be an explicit cleanup action, probably.
Got it. Another question that are we able to support multiple versions of Antrea by the operator?
Currently, the version of the operator just support one version of Antrea. It is a one-to-one relationship.
Okay, got it. That means for every new Antrea release, you will need a new operator.
Yes, yes, because some options will be different between different Antrea version.
And then for the master, I mean Antrea master, the master, the bits from master bunch, probably we don't have a way to track the change, right? What's our strategy?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, we are saying just after every Antrea version released, we have a new operator version. But for the master, probably we don't. We probably don't have a way to track the change in the master.
Yes. On serious, if the options have no change, it will be can be used.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, probably my last one. Probably we don't need to conclude here. I've started wondering for what's kind of useful feature. Do you think it makes sense to put that into Antrea repo itself? I mean, if we're able to decouple some OpenShift specific thing, just for generic operator functionalities, is that possible? I don't know. It's possible or not. It's like could we try some generic functionalities and maintain it in Antrea repo, and then that means even from Antrea itself, we have some useful operator features first. And second, probably it's easier to track the change in Antrea itself. I mean, if we put anything depends on the Antrea config map or some other behaviors, it's probably easier to maintain that in Antrea repo itself.
Yes. Currently, we want to provide the compatibility for the standard Kubernetes environment in current repo, and for the things you have mentioned, I think for the first step, we can consider to expose some functions or some data structures from the Antrea repo. We can directly use this exposed structures for in the Antrea operator. How do you think?
Okay. Yeah, probably. Actually, I didn't think about that much yet. Probably. Let's discuss more on this one. Since we're really run a little too round of time today, so.
Yes.
So one very quick question for me is, do you think this installation process with the Antrea operator for OpenShift can work also on other platforms like AWS, Azure, GCP, or do you think there will be some blocking issue there?
I think there's no block issues. We just need to do some code clean to set the code can run on other platforms to not to depend on the OpenShift.
Perfect, thank you. All right, is there any final question on the Antrea operator? Waiting 10 seconds. So, all right, So thanks for staying with us for a little bit longer than expected. It's been a great presentation from Roy. Also, thanks a lot to Abhishek and Yang for the discussion on network policy, Antrea network policy, cluster network theory, network policy topics. And I would like to thank everyone for attending and remind you that we will update meeting times for the next meeting until the next change of daylight saving time in the next spring, and the new meeting time will also be updated in the Antrea README. So thanks everyone for attending, and I wish everyone a good evening, a good morning, or good afternoon.
Goodbye.